Learners, in this part of the lecture, I will discuss the management of sediment and soil erosion in a watershed. Management of the sediment production and transport in a watershed and deposition in reservoirs and soil conservation measures are necessary to sustain economic growth in a watershed. Therefore, efforts must be made by hydrogeologists and watershed managers by involving the local community to prevent unacceptable rates of soil erosion and the resulting increase in sediment yields. It can be achieved by implementing ecologically, environmentally, and economically sound management practices to prevent these detrimental impacts. Soil conservation is the prevention of loss of the topmost layer of the soil from erosion or prevention of reduced fertility caused by overusage, acidification, salinization, or other chemical soil contaminants. Soil conservation includes all such measures that help in protecting the soil from erosion and exhaustion. Soil conservation measures rely on obtaining proper knowledge of the land resources in use, monitoring fields and detecting critical zones, identifying and implementing the best suited soil conservation methods, and controlling and estimating the efficiency of applied soil conservation techniques. Numerous methods can be adopted for the conservation of the soil and water resources right from farmland level to watershed level. Since the cause of soil erosion differ from one area to other, different measures need to be adopted to combat the problem in different areas at different scales. Sediment erosion control and soil conservation methods can be broadly classified into three categories. They are vegetative measures, engineering measures, and geohydro measures. Measures like afforestation, ban on shifting cultivation, controlled grazing, mixed cropping, mixed farming, rotation of the crops, stopping the use of the synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and mulching also reduces soil degradation and maintain the nutrient levels. Among these methods, some of the frequently used soil conservation measures are discussed in this part of the lecture. If the conservation measures are applied within the farmland, they are termed as in situ conservation measures for arable lands. In situ soil conservation measures include a set of the farming techniques and practices to avoid degradation, erosion, and depletion of soil resources. The various in situ conservation measures suitable for a arable land are contour bunding, graded bunding, stone wall terrace, portico terrace, bench terrace, etc. Contour bunding is a ridge or earthen embankment constructed across the land slope. Contour bunds are generally constructed in relatively low rainfall areas to control soil erosion and conserve rainwater. Portico terrace of the dry stone is constructed along the contours which develop in level bench terrace due to shifting soil down the slope every time after plugging. This type of terrace is especially suitable for arable lands when the slope is more than 6% and where the depth of the soil is shallow. In some of the highly sloping areas where the soil depth is limiting factor and is the cultivable valley, stone wall terraces are common, particularly in the areas where stones are readily available. Like stone bunds, the stone wall barriers are also put across the slope of developing terraces on the downhill slope and particularly in valleys. This practice is also adopted to create additional cultivable land by cutting the hill slopes and concentrating the soil erosion from the adjoining land at an appropriate site. Conservation tillage is a soil conservation technique that aims at addressing wind and water erosion by covering the earth with vegetation and limiting the number of tilling operations. Another significant aspect is to choose the proper time for field operations depending on the soil types. No-till farming assists in soil conservation as well, since it implies no or minimum disturbance and planting seeds into the crop residue. Contour farming proves efficient in slope territories and suggests planting species along the contours. Row up and down the slope provoke soil erosion due to water current, while rows along the contour restrain it. In the strip cropping, farmers combine high growing crops with the low growing ones for the sake of wind protection, like when corn grows in the strip with the forage crop. Wind breaks are used to reduce the power of wind and their destructive effects on the soil. These are tree or bushes to shelter crops from snow and winds planted in several rows. Buffer strips are trees and bushes on the bank of water bodies to prevent sedimentation, water wash-off. Their roots fix the soil to avoid slumping and erosion. Canopies protect from excessive sunlight to water inhabitants, and falling leaves are a source of organic matter and food for minor aquatic animals. Learners, in situ conservation measures for non-arable lands differ from arable lands. The upper reaches of the watershed usually consist of hilly areas. These areas have an undulating topography, often barren steep slopes, and are prone to soil erosion. In these areas, vegetation does not get established because of a steep slope and severe soil erosion. The uncontrolled runoff from these slopes lands also causes excessive damage to the adjoining agriculture lands. Therefore, it is necessary to treat these areas with appropriate soil and water conservation measures supplemented with proper tree planting techniques. Several suitable engineering, soil and water conservation measures can be adopted for non-arable lands for in situ conservation of soil and rainwater. Let's learn about them. A contour trench is an excavated trench constructed along the contours across the slope of the land in upper and middle reaches of a watershed. It is constructed both on the hill slopes as well as on the degraded and sloping watersheds for soil and water conservation and to establish a vegetative cover. Trenches are constructed below the contour lines in such a way that its upper edge exactly coincide with the contour line. Bunds are formed downstream along the trenches with the excavated material taken from them. It breaks the slope length, reduces the velocity of flowing water, and retards its scoring action. The rainwater retained in the trenches help in situ conservation of moisture, which travel down and also benefit the better type of land in the lower reaches of the watershed. Contour trenches are generally recommended to be constructed for the land having slope up to 30% only because it is not stable and technically not feasible for the slope above this. The contour trench can be of rectangular or trapezoidal shape. The size of the trench can be changed depending on the quantity of the runoff available for in situ conservation. Staggered trenches are the excavated trenches of shorter length in a row along the contour with interspace between them. Constructed in a staggered manner, the vertical interval between the row is restricted to impound the runoff expected from the catchment area without overflowing the trenches. The cross-section area of these trenches is designed to collect runoff expected from the most intense storms. The dugout soil is heaped upon the downstream side of the trench. These trenches perform very well in improving the moisture regime of a highly slopy, denuded lands, which help in the quick growth and the survival of plants and grasses. Staggered trenches are recommended to be constructed for the land having a slope greater than 30% because for the slope above this it is not possible to maintain absolute contour by manual labors, which is very much essential for continuous contour trenches. V-ditches are constructed on the contour by excavating a V-shaped trench and forming a bund downstream of the trench. The ditch laid across the slope breaks the length of the slope and hereby check the velocity of runoff. Gradoni is steeply inward sloping, very narrow bench terrace constructed on the contours. They are suited for afforestation in uniformly steep sloping areas because they have enough capacity to retain water, and at the same time plant grown in these and in the interspace of two gradonis will get more moisture. Microcatchments are created in the lands having soil with light to moderate texture and 2 to 8% slopes. Microcatchments help in situ moisture conservation and erosion control for tree crops. These structures may reduce surface runoff by 80%. In box-cum-pit system, box-type trenches of a fixed size are excavated. Each box is provided with one pit of specified size on the downstream side of afforestation purpose. It effectively controls erosion, conserves moisture, and raises trees, particularly in the area that is severely degraded and where the soil depth is a limiting factor. Learners, we have discussed the reservoir siltation problem in the module on surface water management. Reservoir sedimentation is a severe problem and there are only two strategies to reduce the sediment yields entering a reservoir: either prevent erosion or trap eroded sediment before it reaches the reservoir. Soil conservation measures help in reducing the sediment load of the rivers and the problem of dam siltation. The rehabilitation of some watersheds can dramatically reduce the rate at which sediment, nutrient, and other contaminants are delivered to a reservoir. For trapping the sediment before it reaches the reservoir, upstream reservoir may be constructed. These structures will act only as sediment retention basins. Drawdown sediments routing or sluicing is another emerging mechanism. It involves discharging high flows through the dam during period of high inflows to the reservoir to permit the sediments to be transported through the reservoir as rapidly as possible while minimizing sedimentation. Sediment routing includes many methods for manipulating reservoir hydraulics, geometry, or both to pass sediment through or around reservoir or intake areas while minimizing objectionable deposition. Sediment routing techniques include sediment passing through and sediment bypass. Let us see what kind of benefits can we have by promoting soil conservation. Mankind in general and farmer in particular benefit from soil conservation measures. It is recognized that soil conservation boosts soil quality and productivity. It mitigates erosion and promotes water infiltration and increase its storage. Soil conservation also help in air and water purification and also provide food and shelter for wildlife. While concluding this lecture, I would like to emphasize that the effect of soil conservation may not reveal in short time perspective, yet they will be beneficial for future generations. Hence, hydrologists and watershed managers should make efforts to prevent unacceptable rates of soil erosion and resulting increase in sediment yields. To prevent these detrimental impacts, ecological, environment friendly and economically sound management practices should be employed. Besides, area and watershed experiencing excessive soil erosion and sediment yield need to be identified and effective intervention should be taken. Thanks.